Prepare to enter the dungeon. That's what we're going to explore in this Talisman Tactica vlog. And as always, there are not going to be any spoilers. I'm not going to name any cards, encounters, magic objects, followers, and certainly not the end quest rewards, because so much of the game is discovering this narrative and earning that tabletop glory. So the dungeon ranks there with the Highlands, in that there are a number of encounters, there's some magic objects, there are some interesting followers, but the primary focus is to make it to the end to claim a card reward. Taking on the Eagle King with the Highlands, and in the dungeon, taking on the Lord of Darkness. Now, depending on the house rules, sometimes these end cards are random, sometimes these cards are select. Depending on how you play, select as in you get to pick the one that you want. Random, of course, being Talisman, you mix up the deck and you draw it. Depending on how you play with those house rules or the rules as written, that does change things a little bit, because there's a duality of some very powerful artifacts and then some that are not as powerful, but interesting, fun. The question is it worth dipping into the dungeon for it? Now, in terms of ranking, it's hard to rank the sideboards, the big box expansions, because, of course, Talisman being Talisman, there's a lot of factors in play. What are the current characters? Do you have all 4 sideboards? Do you just have 2? Do you have 1? But generally speaking, the Highlands is the easiest. Then we see the city, or one could say Highlands and city are equal. Then you've got the woodlands, and then the dungeon. The dungeon is much more challenging than the woodlands, although there are, of course, some powerful encounters in the woodlands. But the main thing, of course, is Fae. You're getting hit by magic. You're getting hit by fate. You're getting totified like every other turn. It's a different kind of challenge. The dungeon itself has, on average, more powerful monsters and encounters. So what you're looking to do is make it through as quickly as possible. The dungeon is not something that I would recommend to farm. Farming is where you would go in and just kind of bounce around back and forth and draw some of the cards and try to get some gear, specific gear from that perspective. You can do that, but if we're going to farm, there's better places like the city or the Highlands, and primarily with the Highlands to get certain objects, turn them into gold, and then go shopping in the city. So with that, I generally see the dungeon as high risk, high reward. It's generally not something I'm going to run into early on in the game, almost never, unless I draw such a bad character that I want to get killed immediately so I can draw another character. I'll run into the dungeon. There might be some times where if you have a powerful artifact that everyone is kind of running and gunning for and someone hasn't destroyed it with magic, maybe you jump into the dungeon and just drop it off because you're tired of having that target magnified on you. But if we are going to go into the dungeon for those quest cards, those end rewards, do you have some sort of insert magic object, insert ability, insert spell to make it through as quick as possible in maybe like 2 or 3 card draws instead of 6 or 7 that it might normally take? From that perspective, understanding the ranking, understanding the tactica, and understanding the challenges that the dungeon brings. Now, is this a sideboard expansion that you're regularly going to play? That's a good question, especially if you're acquiring Talisman kind of that order. I generally play Talisman in one of 2 ways. Base game only for a quick game that we want to play, and maybe some of the smaller box expansions like the Reaper, putting that into it. But on the opposite side, if you're giving me a chance to really choose how to play and how I prefer to play, I like to play with all of the sideboard expansions. So I don't want to scare you away from the dungeon, but realize the complexity and the difficulty ranking and the place that it has in the Tactica, going for those end game objects to help give you an edge towards the Crown of Command versus jumping in for the narrative and farming, which absolutely you can do, but you have to be ready for what you're getting into.